This happened when I was in high school, which was a long time ago. My mom actually just recently found the paperwork about it when she cleaned out her office upon retiring from the police department. I remember being very upset and scared when it happened, but reading the details as an adult, it sounded even worse than what I remembered. I was 17 at the time and was female, working at a flower and gift shop. It was around nighttime when this man came in. Short, overweight, balding, 40s, very creepy as well. He told me about how he needed an apology gift for his girlfriend. So I offer a bouquet, obviously. It's a flower shop after all. He then says though that she doesn't like flowers because they die so easily. This was the first weird thing. If that was the case, then why would he come into a flower shop? Then he starts going into detail about how he hit her and asked me if I thought he was right to do so. This was so long ago, I don't remember exactly why he smacked her around. I do remember saying something along the lines of, "Not if you want her to continue being your girlfriend." He then told me what a great job I was doing and asked when I get off work. I dodged his answer and he left right away. Nothing else happened for about 6 months. Then, right before Valentine's Day, he burst into the door 1 minute before closing. It was pretty dark, and from outside it looked like I must be working alone, as my only coworker, about 40 and female, was away in the bathroom. Instinctively, it felt like a predator had just entered the room. You know that feeling you get when something isn't quite right? I felt that pretty much right away. I then noticed he had a tarnished revolver tucked into the front of his windbreaker, which was halfway unzipped already. It was obvious he wanted it to be seen. I quickly scribbled the note to my coworker that said he has a gun. I handed it to her right away when she came out of the bathroom. She calmly walked to the phone and looked at me, wordlessly asking if she should call the cops. I shook my head no, as I felt like it would only escalate the situation. God forbid he heard the police coming or something and took us all hostage. I was just going to try and act calm and normal as I could. Hopefully, the situation would not tip into something more dangerous. He spent about 15 minutes wandering around in what was really a fairly small shop. In retrospect, I think he was probably waiting to see if my coworker would leave, as it was now well past closing. Finally, he placed an order for pickup on Valentine's Day. He gave me his name and info for it. I made sure to file that away for the police report I was sure as hell about to put in. He bought a card and pulled out a wad of $100 bills, which he slowly thumbed through as if looking for the exact right one with which to pay for his $40 order. I asked him if he wanted a bag, as it wouldn't be very inconspicuous if he just showed up at home with a Valentine's Day card. No, I don't really feel like being inconspicuous tonight. It seemed like an obvious reference to the gun barely hiding in his coat. He left and we quickly locked the door behind him and watched him just sit in his truck outside. We were not about to exit the shop until he was gone. After a little while, he pulled out of his parking spot, making it look like he was going to leave, only to move to another spot slightly further away and continue to sit there. I don't know how long we waited, but after even longer, he finally left. I called my mom after crying. She called the police, who came to the shop the next day to take a report. I told my best friend at the time what happened too, and she told her mother. Her mother happened to work with the man and informed security at her job. She said he was known to be very weird, creepy, and liked to talk about weapons a lot. Security at his job, it's a large company with government contracts and things having to do with tech and security, pulled him into the office later and questioned him about the incident. He claimed it was a glove in his pocket, not a revolver. The police were pissed that his company made contact with him about it before they did, and he successfully managed to dodge the cops' multiple calls and visits to his apartment. My mom, much to my teen fury at the time, made me quit that job, which was devastating as I really loved working there. In retrospect, though, it was totally the right call. The dude did come in on Valentine's Day and picked up his order without any problem, and after that I never saw him again. This is very long, so I apologize. I don't really know how to be concise with these sorts of things. It was Halloween night, stereotypical, I know. Several years ago, I was followed home by a stranger. I worked at a large mall about an hour away from my home. The stores closed at 10 p.m., and the only bus home ran every hour and only dropped me off 2/3 of the way there. I would have to walk the rest by myself. This usually happened between 11 to 1 a.m. at night, depending on if I could get the store closed down on time and if the bus wasn't too packed for me to get on. I'm not a small woman by any means. I'm actually fairly tall and fairly round, and I wouldn't say I'm particularly attractive. My uniform was just a polo shirt and black trousers, some flat shoes as well, all covered with a very thick coat. I didn't see him get on the bus. To be fair, that day the bus was packed, and noisy as well. The walkways were crowded over. I did my best to just block it all out with my headphones, and stared out the window. I was never a people person in the first place, and having been at work for 12 hours on a very busy day surrounded by some of these same assholes, I was just pissed off and desperate to get off that bus and be home. When we finally arrived to my stop, I somehow managed to struggle my way to the front of the bus, through all of the people that refused to move. I stumbled out into the night air and breathed a heavy sigh of relief. A couple of other people got off the bus behind me. I started my climb up the hill, crossing the road to continue up the side street that led to my road. This side street was very long and had offshoots into several residential streets on very steep hills going downward. The street itself was lined with various small shops. There was also a high grassy bank on the opposite side that had houses dotting the top of it. It felt very isolated after the shops closed. Very few people would ever get off my bus stop at this time of night, and even fewer still would ever head in the same direction as I did. Those that did tended to cut off and go down one of those other hills, long before I got to the one that led to my building. Now, the street wasn't very well lit at all. The street lamps were few and far between. Several of them were also motion activated, so they wouldn't even turn on until you were basically right on top of them. I walked home in the dark this way 1,000 times before. I also walked to work this way as well, at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, 1,000 times too, for a different job albeit. I always enjoyed the cool night air, and I was not afraid of the dark. I actually loved how bright the stars were where I lived, and I didn't tend to loiter either. I walked fast so I could get home and shower ASAP. This night though, I noticed that someone was still walking behind me. I usually do notice things like that because, as I stated before, very few people walk this way at this time of night. I was very aware of him and waiting for him to eventually turn down one of the side streets. But he never did. It felt a little weird, but I'm not the only person that lives in that area. Maybe he was just someone that wasn't regularly walking this way at this time of night, so I just never encountered him before. I get to the medical surgery and car park at the bottom of my hill and cut across it same as always. At this point, I know that if he also heads the same way, I need to start worrying a lot more. This hill goes alongside the surgery, and then there are high walls on my side of the street that block off all the flats on the other side from my road. They can only be accessed from the road before mine. At the top of the hill, this wall ends and turns into an alley that runs parallel to my building. The opposite side of the road has multiple closed pubs, a closed corner store, and an old church that had been converted into a Muslim worship center, which is also now closed. There were even less street lamps in this area, and my building was surrounded by a tall metal fence with 20 or so feet of grass that sloped down to the entrance of my building, where the doorway was the only point lit up. My point being with this description that it was very isolated. And the only reason someone should ever be up there at this time of night is if they lived in the same building I did. This guy crossed the car park right after me, and now I started feeling very concerned. I knew for a fact that he did not live in my building. There are 9 flats over 3 floors, and only 10 people. I know all of them, and they know me as well. We would recognize each other, even in this level of darkness. I start walking faster up the hill, hoping to get to the building before he can manage to catch up. He starts catching pace with me. I can hear him gaining on me. By the time I make it to the gate, I knew he was too close for me to be able to open the door and get inside before he was already on me. The building was already dark. I knew everyone was in bed by now. I felt completely alone, and at this point I was basically shitting myself. Thinking quickly, I crossed the road and walked further up the hill behind some parked cars. I used the opportunity to swing my backpack off one shoulder and grab my keys. I waited for him to follow me and get behind the cars too. I figured it would take just a little longer for him to be able to cross back over before I bolted across the road and threw open the gate. I swung it hard behind me because he was now running full at me. I thought it would either latch before it could catch it or it would smack him. Either way, it would buy me a few seconds. I slid down the slope, barely managing to stay on my feet. It was dangerously slippery when wet. I turned the corner at the bottom and slammed my keycard on the reader, pressing hard on the heavy door before it beeps so it will open just that much faster. The door was heavy and also on fire safety hinges, which meant I couldn't slam it shut or force it closed. The stairs were a couple of steps into the building and to the left. I lived on the top floor. It was not exactly a big building. 3 flats on each floor, 2 flights of stairs. I get inside the building and immediately bolt up the stairs. I was only a few steps up when the door flew open behind me, and the guy came running in after me. Feeling a little more secure now that I'm in my building and only a few feet away from my neighbors, I spin around before he can reach me and slam my heavy backpack into him. He fell back to the landing and barely managed to catch himself by grabbing hold of the handrail. I screamed at him, "What the fuck?" at the top of my lungs and held my bag in front of me. Now we were inside. The stairwell was lit up by the motion-activated lights. I got my first proper look at him. He was a little bit taller than me. I'm 5'8". He was black and old enough to be graying as well. His clothes were weird, made out of a weird waxy material some weatherproof jackets are. He was also wearing heavy boots. I didn't recognize his face at all. He looked up at me with these wild eyes as I stared down at him. I was fully prepared to kick him in the face and throw my bag if I had to. I didn't want him to be able to follow me into my flat, so I stared him down. At this point, he began to stutter, hands ringing over the handrail and ducking his head just a little, trying to look pathetic and harmless. He muttered something about visiting his son. Like I stated before, 9 other people than me live in this building. At that time, none of them were black, and none of them other than myself were young enough for him to be their parent. Besides, even if his son did live here, how would he know to follow me off the bus to get to my building? Why did he follow me when I moved away from it? And why did he chase me so hard? He could have just walked up and buzzed up to his son to let him in, if this was true. I began screaming at him to get the hell out, repeating those words over and over, sprinkling in an occasional "I don't know you and you don't live here." He continued muttering, making his excuses, but I shouted over him. I heard my neighbors moving around and coming towards their doors, probably to look through their peepholes, as I began to back up the stairs. The neighbor right at the bottom of the stairs behind the man opened her door, leaving her chain on and peering through it at us. She asked me if I was okay and if she needed to call the police. The guy spun around instantly to stare at her, his hands out in a stop motion. I heard another neighbor open his door behind the stairs, also on the ground floor. He called out to ask if I was okay too. I just yelled out to both of them, "This guy followed me home. I don't know who he is and he won't leave." I was now at the top of the first set of stairs looking down on him. My male neighbor started yelling at him to get the fuck out. either more intimidated by the man than he was of me, or realizing he was now outnumbered, he began trying to fumble open the door. You have to press a particular button to get it to open, and he clearly did not know this. Further evidence he'd never been here before. Feeling more secure now that I was not alone, and that he was trying to escape, I bolted across the landing and up the final flight of stairs. I shoved my door open before locking it behind me. I was dripping with sweat and very close to a panic attack. I dragged my Hoover to the front door and propped it up, just in case someone tried to force it open. I would hear it fall. I didn't sleep very well that night, though. I was awoken by every sound in the building. Luckily, I didn't have to work the next day, though. I woke up at about 6 a.m. to a lot of sound in the building's landings. I could hear people opening every bin chute room and coming back out again. I peered through my peephole to see uniformed policemen searching the common areas of the building. I hadn't called the police, but I assume one of my neighbors downstairs did. The bin rooms are fairly large, so I imagine they were checking to see if he was hiding somewhere. I don't know for sure, and I never asked. Other than asking me if I was okay when we saw each other next, the neighbors that helped on that night never said anything else about it. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. I've never seen him again after, and I stopped working at that shopping center a couple of years ago. I do feel guilty for not calling the police, just in case he'd done this before or since and the woman didn't manage to get away. But at the time, I just wanted to forget all about it and move forward with my life. This happened in 2008 when I was 9 years old. I lived in a townhome community where each road had two sides of homes. In between the backs of the houses, there was a back road with alleyways that went in between each building section. I lived on the edge of one of these, and my townhome was on one of the alleyways. I lived on one street, and across the back road on the opposite side lived this elderly woman whose name I never even knew. I'm not exactly sure what her situation was, but I do know that for whatever reason, she really disliked me specifically. She was very creepy. She had spray painted all of her windows so no one could ever see into her house. However, that never stopped her from sometimes staring out her bedroom window directly into mine, keeping it open at night to shine a red strobe light into my room across the way. She even used to randomly yell out how much she hated us. I was in the 4th grade at this time. On a particular January morning, I had unfortunately missed the bus to school. My dad sent me outside to get in the car so he could drive me. He said he'd be following me out shortly after. As I was walking to my dad's car, though, that old woman spontaneously came out of the alleyway right next to my house, slowly. I could see she had a gigantic kitchen knife behind her back. She raised it above her head and started bolting after me. Thankfully, I was faster than her, so I was able to avoid her and able to get back into the house. She walked and stood on the neighbor's porch across the way and stared at my house with a knife in her hand. I was terrified. My dad ran out and yelled at her. She said she wanted to get rid of us stupid kids. My parents called the police, but the police only sent her home and had an ambulance pick her up later. My parents went to some kind of court meeting about it, but I don't really understand the details. I didn't see her again for a while after that, until about 1 year later. I don't remember the exact day, but it had snowed that morning, so I was going to run out the front door and play a bit in the snow. I opened the door to see her standing on the porch, looking out towards the road. I panicked, closed, and locked the door. I ran up to my parents' room and told them what happened. We saw her walk off the porch and up the street. I never saw her again after that. My family has since moved far away from there, but people I know say she still lives there, and her windows are still the same spray-painted ones. Even though it doesn't affect me quite as much as it used to, I still don't like being around knives because of this. When I was younger, somewhere between 5 or 8 years old, A distant family member who was supposedly well-loved died. One of his last wishes was for the final celebration of his life to take place at his childhood home. His son, DJ, decided to respect these wishes and contacted the current owner of the house to ask if a small gathering could be hosted on the premises, entirely outside, of course. As far as DJ and everyone else could tell, the homeowner was kind and understanding, and agreed, offering even to help us out, being clear on boundaries and such though. Fast forward to the event itself. My whole family was arriving. I'd say around 3 in the afternoon. I still had this horrible, anxious feeling deep in my stomach that I couldn't quite shake. I mentioned it to my mom, saying something silly that I probably heard on the TV about my gut feeling. My parents shrugged it off, of course, and told me it's fine, and to come on. At that age, I trusted my parents' judgment completely. So I stepped out of the car, all dressed in a cute dress and layered in cheap plastic jewelry, think Mardi Gras beads, that I proudly chose myself to appear formal for this serious occasion. My mom, my dad, and I all walked toward the backyard, aiming towards the right-hand side of the house, as the inside was off limits due to it being private property. At this very moment, a man burst out of the front door, holding a bat firmly in his hands. This was not a normal baseball bat intended to just occupy children either. No, this man burst out of his front door screaming at everyone, talking about how horrible we all are and how our family was disgusting, all while gripping a beat-up old bat full of nails. Immediately I panicked. My fight or flight, in this case flight, kicked in. I made a beeline to our old blue car I'd only just got dragged out of by my dad. I jumped in and slammed the door behind me, panicking with tear-blurred vision and an incredibly upset stomach. I turned to look out the window, only to see that man, the crazy man who made the quick decision to target an elementary-age little girl as he took a swing right at the car and hit the area above the back tire, creating a loud ring and a big dent. My dad, who took what felt like 5 hours but was probably more around 10 seconds, shoved the man away and jumped in, my mom following quickly behind. We sped away from the house and back home, not mentioning a thing except for how proud of me they were for running. They also told me they'd listen to me if I ever had that horrible gut feeling that something was wrong ever again, though both my mom and dad kept shooting quick glances behind the car and whispering to one another. My family really never discussed this event with me around again, but when I asked my mom what happened years later, she explained that the man had decided to do a Google search on DJ and found his estranged criminal brother's records on Google. He decided this was enough evidence to attack our family during a wake with a nailed baseball bat.